Good afternoon, friends, and welcome to the EduSat Network. Our today's topic of discussion is politics in the Americas, and the focus shall be on United States, Canada, and Mexico. And for this discussion, we have us in our studio our subject expert, Dr. Prajita Kashyap, Assistant Professor Guru Gobind Singh, Indraprastha University, New Delhi. And with this brief introduction, I would like to introduce her to our viewers and also welcome her to our EduSat Network. Thank you so much for coming, ma'am. And with this, I also request you to begin our today's lecture.
Yeah, thank you, Urvashi. Today's lecture is basically talking about politics in the Americas. And when I say Americas, I would be focusing mostly on these three countries, USA, Canada, Mexico. So mostly North American part of the continent. And before we begin, we must try and see that these three countries are large size countries. Then all the three of them are federal countries, and all of them have experienced unique kind of political development, political upheavals they faced have been unique. So taking this into consideration, I would just take up a country-wise specific case study, and then maybe towards the end we can take up some questions if time permits. Now, if we look at the political history of a country, we talk about political processes, we talk about activities, we talk about institutions of the government, and all the citizens' issues that are involved with them. So taking my first case, which is United States of America, there are certain things about history which we have to trace. If we look at the Declaration of Independence 1776, which was followed by the War of Independence, and this went on for 7 years, and after the end of which then the process of writing the Constitution started, and finally the American Constitution at the Philadelphia Convention was adopted in 1789. Having adopted a Constitution, the clear-cut structure or face which emerged of USA was that it was a federal country having a legislature which is called the Congress, and there are two houses of the legislature. One is the House of Representatives and the other is the Senate. The second body, or the executive, comprises the President, Cabinet, the federal departments and agencies related to various areas and issues. And the judiciary is a Supreme Court, and within the Supreme Court there are other federal courts. So it is a single hierarchical system of judiciary, and the apex is the Supreme Court of United States. And if you look at the components of this federalism, which are called units of federalism, then we have 50 states which have their own elected governments, they have their own legislature, they have their own competences. Now, if we look at the composition of the Congress in the United States has two houses, as I told you, the House of Representatives, which is like the Indian, is the popular house, like the Indian Lok Sabha, and it has 435 members, and each member is elected from a congressional district, and he serves a 2-year term. The House in these, the seats in the House are apportioned among the states in proportion to the population. So this is very much like the Indian system. So it's based on the proportional system, that is in proportion to the population, the representatives would be assigned. And the Senate, unlike the Indian Rajya Sabha, the Indian Rajya Sabha has also has members being returned on the size of the state. But in US, surprisingly, the Senate has 100 members. Each member represents a state and serves a 6-year term. And each state, irrespective of its size or population, returns 2 members. Therefore, the difference is that whereas for us it is proportional to the size and the population, in US we disregard the size and the population. So even a small state like Vermont would be comparable to any of the larger states. And if you look at the executive in Congress has a very unique characteristic. The executive, most of the time, like we have a cabinet system, but because it is a presidential system, the cabinet has negligent or minimal role. The prime minister consults the cabinet, but the advice of the cabinet will be heard or it will not be heard, depends on the whims and fancies of the president. And that is why the nomenclature kitchen cabinet has been assigned to the US system. Now, if you look at the judiciary has, as I told you, it has a hierarchical system, and the Supreme Court dominates. Now, these judges are nominated by the president and confirmed with the advice and consent of the Senate. So the role here is of Senate, more important role. Now, as federal judges, these justices, they serve during good behavior, and there is no definition or there is no age of good behavior, meaning thereby that they can serve for life and can be removed only by resignation or by impeachment and subsequent conviction. So the method of removal is very complicated, and so the term of the judges is ensured. If they have a longish term, then they can serve till they are mentally sound and they can deliver good justice, because the feeling there is that you don't age as far as delivery of justice is concerned. You become more mature, you become more competent in your sphere. That is why there is no age of retirement in the United States judicial system. Now, if you look at the most powerful person in the entire world, and we can single-handedly point out that US president is the most powerful person. And why is he so powerful? Because he commands a king-size country, he commands a king-size economy, and then he has two posts fused in one, that is, there is fusion of head of the state and head of government in one position. And that is why the post of the President of United States is a much sought after and much looked up to post. Now, the President has a 4-year term and maximum 2 terms, so he cannot be re-elected at the end of these 2 terms. He is a protector of the Constitution, he proposes legislation, he executes legislation, he takes certain decisions which he doesn't need even to take the concurrence of the cabinet. Unlike India, in which the decision has to be taken in the cabinet meetings, these the cabinet or the Secretary of State, which they are called in the United States, they are basically advisors or friends of the President of United States, and whenever there is a need, they will advise. If that advice is heard or is it ignored, completely depends on the will of the President. Now, so he is also the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and this gives him a very, very strong position. He puts him in a very strong position. Unlike the commander of the chief forces in India, India is more of a ceremonial post, but here it is more an acting post. And more importantly, he appoints the judges to the Supreme Court, of course, with the consent of the Senate. So the President does not belong to any of the houses. There is a separate election for president, and that is why that's why we say that the presidential election in America is indirectly direct, because it is the people who have voted for him. Although the method of election is a bit complicated. Now, if you look at the federation, the nature of federation in United States, how a federation is created differs in many states. So these are called centrifugal federations, or these are called centripetal federations. So, for example, in India, we devolved power, we created states from one center for administrative convenience, whereas in the United States, or for example in Switzerland, it was the other way round. Many of the units, they came together because they thought their economy, their foreign policy, their security were issues which they couldn't tackle by themselves, so they needed to come together. So they sign an instrument and they come together. So this kind of a creation is called bottom-up creation. So the US Federation is called the bottom-up federation. Now, if you look at the working of the federation, you can easily say that except Switzerland, no other Western democracy diffuses so much power to their states as does America. So the degree of devolution of power, or the kind of federation that we have, is very, very real and actually very, very practical and theoretical, as one would say, in America. Unlike India, India claims to be a federal country, but for reasons beyond our control, or there are certain compulsions for which we have adopted a middle path between a unitary and a federal form of government, and this is known as quasi-federalism, a unique form of federalism. And this term was coined by Casey Weir when he talked about American federalism. So in India, the states, most of the time, they question the kind of autonomy they have been granted. But in case of America, the autonomy is almost complete, and to a very large extent. But nonetheless, it is not that there are no criticisms of the kind of federal system that United States has. If you look at these Tea Party movements which have arisen recently, and they have been electorally successful, they have started propagating the view that the federal government has become too dominant, too intrusive, and too profligate. So they basically want to do away with this system of the predominance of the center government, and there are many takers within United States who have this approach, and that is why the Tea Party movements have become very popular. Now, when we talk about federalism, the biggest problem is how powers are shared, and when we share power, that is where the problem arises. So when we share power, it is done in three ways. In all federations, it is done in three ways. There are certain powers which belong exclusively to the center. There are certain powers which belong exclusively to the state. And there are certain competencies where the center and state both is capable of making rules or laws, or they can function in those areas. But the problem here is that whenever there is an inconsistency between the jurisdiction of the center and the state, more often than not, it is the center which prevails. So by leaving this concurrent list, we are kind of leaving room for more importance being given to the center. Now, this leaves us, so now we have to consider one important area, and that is the list of residuary subjects. So what we find is that we have given an extensive state list, we have given an extensive central list, and we have union list, and the third is the concurrent list. Even after having done that, there are certain areas which may not have been covered in this exhaustive list. So these subjects, which are called the residuary subjects, they get assigned to either the state or the center. For example, in India, whenever there is a residuary subject, it falls within the purview of the center. So we kind of give more importance to the center, but in US, the residuary subjects, they rest with the state. So whenever there is an open area, it goes to the state. This is very important, because these residuary matters then become the deciding areas of importance of the center or the state. Now, if you look at the sharing of competence, matters within the state and local government are very important areas. There are issues like highways, road construction, state income tax, public schools and universities, police and fire departments. Police is under state control, and regulation of business and supervision of commercial affairs. So even business activities are by and large controlled by the states. The federal system of government, what does it control? It controls obviously foreign policy, defense and monetary policy. And other areas which cannot be regulated locally, things like interstate crime, interstate environmental problems, all these which require the agreement between two or more states, then the federal government comes in to legislate on those areas. Now, if we look at the constitution, so how did this division take place? How was the polity formed? How was clear-cut division of power done? So, if we look at the constitution of United States, it agrees to one of the tests of federalism, and for the first test of federalism is that a country must have a written constitution. So, it abides by that test. But it's a large country with 50 states, has the shortest constitution in the world. It has a preamble, a 7 article and 27 amendments, and most of these amendments were made in the first 1 or 2 years of the constitution having been written down, that is 1789. So there are, unlike India's constitution is very exhaustive. We have around 400 articles, and so United States has managed to control their constitutional amendments, and only 27 so far. And the last amendment was in the 1990s. So for so far, and you know why? Because the problem is the procedure of amendment is very, very rigid, and that doesn't give room for very frequent amendments. If you look at the political parties in America, there are 2 major parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican parties, and therefore it moves towards multi-party system, but we cannot say that it is a truly multi-party system. We can say that it is a 2-party democracy at the most. And whenever there is this problem, this system of 2 parties being predominant, the sophomore surge, a concept becomes very important. This is a concept where incumbents tend to increase their share of the vote when they want to seek re-election. So there is one problem in the American polity, and that is the voter turnout. The voter turnout continues to remain very low, because somewhere I think it is the nature of the political parties which has something to do with that. Now coming to the constitution once again and elaborating on the constitution, it is one of the oldest constitutions, late 18th century, whereas most other countries have had several constitutions written one after the other, and most of them which are now following are a 20th century creation or maybe 21st century creation. Now, this constitution, as I told you, is the shortest constitution, only 27 amendments. And why only 27 amendments? Because it is relatively immutable. That is, there is a great deal of difficulty in changing the provisions. Now, since the US has become the preeminent world economic and political power, major changes in how the presidency operates in the international sphere has taken place, and this puts a pressure on the method of amendment, and there are tendencies or there are efforts towards introducing more and more amendments, but the problem is the process is so tight that reforms are not easy to come by. And there are other ways then in which reforms are brought in. A proposed amendment has to secure 2/3 votes of members present in both the houses of Congress. Then 3/4 of the state legislature have to ratify the proposed change. And then the third thing is that all these stages they are not governed by a specific time limit. So this voting procedure or this bill making procedure may just go on, and that is why the effort or the enthusiasm dies down. So if we look at the United States democracy by and large, it appears to be a divided democracy. And why do we call it a divided democracy? The reasons are that it is divided horizontally, it is divided vertically, and it is divided politically. Then if you look at how the horizontal division has taken place. This is a concept called separation of power. This was given by Montesquieu, and it says that the power cannot be concentrated in a single entity. So for doing away with concentration, we divide power. And how do we do it? We do it in two ways. We have to divide it on the horizontal plane between the different organs of government. So this is, you divide it into the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. All of them have their own powers, their own areas of jurisdiction. They have their own personalities, but a little bit of room is allowed for them to interact or to keep an eye on the other. And this is called the system of checks and balances. So if we say that two defining characteristics of United States polity, then it has to be checks and balances, separation of power, and definitely I would like to add the third, that is judicial review. So three, basically judicial review, separation of power, and system of checks and balances. Now if you look at the vertical division of power is possible only in a true federation, because you have different tiers of governance. So according to the theories of federalism, there are three tiers: the union and the meso level. The meso level is one insertion which is very unique to federal form of government, and the insertion of meso level is done through constitutional. So there is a constitutional guarantee to the middle tier, which is known as province or state in other countries, or units of federation. And then the third is a local level, which is called the local self-government or municipality. So the municipal level exists also in the unitary form of government, but the existence is different in a unitary form and a federal form. Whereas in a unitary form of government, they are the creations of the union or the central government. In federal form of government, they have constitutional status and existence. They are not mere creatures of the center or the state. Now, if we look at the federal division, then in United States we have the federal government and the state governments, and this was the issue on which the Civil War, American Civil War, was fought. If you look at the third way in which the democracy in the United States is divided, it is called political division, and this is often done through sharp criticisms or oppositions that take place. But if we look at United States, this criticism or the sharp division is very less compared to what India would be, because we have by and large a neat two-party system in United States. And then there will be different parties which will have different opinion on, for example, gay rights or environmental issues or gun control. So the views of the different political groups, political parties, pressure groups on any particular aspect would be majorly divided. Now if you come to the latest development within the American polity, there are a few things which I would like to say. That the American polity, the face and nature of American polity changes after the 9/11 attack. So far we had states which were enemies. We could see that state. We could count the number of the soldiers of that state. We could launch a war. There could be a treaty or an agreement signed. We could be clear winner or loser. But after the 9/11 attack, we were fighting a shadowy enemy which were operating from hidden posts or bunkers, and then we could not identify, we could not say that we were clear-cut winners or losers. So this was one defining area. The second defining feature is the difference, what is the status of the African American, and this has been a cause of frequent problems within the United States. The third important problem areas are the frequent natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina. So these natural calamities which America has to face. These also tell a lot about the internal politics of America. Then we have the much debated immigration policy. So, America faces a large immigration population. Now, whether it has to become a melting pot or whether it has to become a quilted structure, that remains to be seen. Then war on drugs is another aspect which is very, very crucial to the recent discussions in America. Now, if we look at the early 21st century, if we just come to another problem, and that is the economic problem. So early 21st century, an economy as big as America has faced several problems. So in foreign policy matters, if we look, then there are predominant role which United States want to acquire within the structure and framework of the United Nations. So we can say that there are issues within United States, but it has tactfully managed those issues and has managed to become one of the leading economies. The other two countries I'll have to quickly go through because time may be a constraint. So if we look at Canada, there were 3 colonies which came together in the British North America Act of 1867, and a federal dominion was formed. Now, once the federal dominion was formed, Canada continued to remain under British monarchy. But with the signing of the Canada Act 1982, the British Parliament's power to amend the Canadian Constitution ended. So in a way, Canada became the master of its own destiny. Now, if you look at the form of government in Canada, it is still a constitutional monarchy where the head of the state is the Queen and the Prime Minister is the head of the government. It is a parliamentary government where we have the same composition. We have the Queen, we have the Prime Minister, we have a Senate of 105 members appointed by the Governor General. The Governor General is the representative of the Queen and on the recommendation of the Prime Minister, and the House of Commons has 308 members elected through general elections. Now, if you look at the political parties, we can call it a 2.5 party system. There's a Liberal Party, there's a Conservative Party, and in between we have some small time parties which raise their heads nonetheless. So it would be a deviation from America's 2-party is 2.5 party system in Canada. You have the Progressive and the CCF NDP. They've never been able to form a government, but they have registered their presence. The Green Party, an environmental party, was formed as early as 1983, much before we talk about the Rio Summit. After 1990s, it has sort of adopted the multi-party system, and these are mostly regional parties. For example, the issues of Western Canada and Quebec have been taken. Now, if you look at Canada, it is a resource-rich country, and that is why the difference with the provinces arise. There are a lot of federal provincial disputes related to the utilization or extraction or making profit from the natural resources, and a unique formula which Canada has adopted is known as the equalization principle. That is, richer provinces have to bear or share the cost of modernizing or taking the smaller provinces into the fold of economic development. Now, if you look at the federation, the kind of federation, it started with cooperative federalism when all the provinces would grow together, develop together, and the relationship was more or less equal. Then comes the rise of a more assertive Quebec nationalism, and this then starts Canada on a different path altogether, takes Canada on a different path, and this era is known as the era of competitive federalism, where there is vigorous competition between the provinces for intergovernmental donations or aids or earning profit from whatever natural resources they have. As I told you earlier, the French-speaking minority is a problem area. This French-speaking minority consists of about 30% of Canada's population, largely concentrated within Quebec, and this has been a major source of debate because a two-nation debate has erupted and it has severe implications for the Canadian unity. Now, many of these French Canadians, they feel that the interest of their society is different from the interest of Canada as a whole, and they fear that in the name of assimilation, the destruction of the very essence of their French roots and culture would be taken away. Therefore, during the 1960s and 70s, the Canadian population became more heterogeneous, and they started demanding, especially the French-speaking areas, they started demanding space for themselves. Now, if we look at, now we quickly move to the third case, and this is Mexico. If we look at Mexico, Mexico has a very, very unique form of development which makes it different. Because in the Mexican context, the Indian population is very important, and the way in which they have been tried to be marginalized made them antagonistic towards whatever development is taking place, and that is why we have so many revolutions, uprisings in Mexico. Now, if you look at Hernan Cortes landing in Mexico in 1519, and this which started the Spanish colonization. Now, once the Spanish colonizers have landed, they started isolating the Indian population, especially the Mayas, and they were very upset about it. So the Spanish colonizers were not accepted very warmly, and they always had to face opposition. Between 1810 and 1821, then we had the War of Independence, and this War of Independence was very important to assert the Mexican identity or the ethnic identity of the Mexicans. Then 1910 to 1920, we had a major episode in history, and that is known as the Mexican Revolution. It was during this period, 1910 to 20, that the new Mexican Constitution was written in 1917. And this Mexican Revolution then has a bearing on the political system of Mexico. Now, if we look at the Mexican system, we can clearly call it a presidential system. The president is elected by plurality vote for a 6-year term. There is no second round, unlike United States. The Chamber of Deputies is a big house, has 500 members, and they are elected by proportional representation in regional districts. The Senate has 128 members, and these members have 6-year term. The Chamber of Deputy members have a 3-year term. So the term is doubled. So the Senate is more secure, it is more powerful, and the longer term ensures that policies are made for a longish period. But the other way around, if we look at the corruption gets more entrenched if you have a longer term. If you look at the Constitution, as I told you, the Constitution was written between the period 1910 to 1920, which was the period of revolution. This 1917 Constitution has undergone multiple amendments. There have been so many amendments because it is an evolving economy and evolving polity. Mexico has seen a lot of upheavals. It has seen economic upheavals. It has seen political upheavals. So it is a very it's a society much in turmoil, and that is why, to keep in tune with that, the Constitution had to be amended very frequently. And as I discussed, US, Canada and Mexico, all of them have federal form of governments. What is the nature of federal form of government in Mexico? It is a federal presidential representative democratic republic. All nomenclatures fit in here. It is basically a federal presidential system, so it should be running on the pattern of United States. Now let us see what is the difference. Now, integrated 31 states and a federal district, just like the United States, the District of Washington, D.C. Each state elects its own governor and legislature. Municipal authorities are chosen at the local level. The government is congressional, and the President of Mexico is head of state and head of the multi-party government. So again, fusion of the head of the state and head of the government in one position, and that makes the president very powerful. Mexico City is the federal district of Mexico, and therefore the seat of federal union is in Mexico City. Looking at the party system, unlike the two and a half party system, Mexico is a one-party democracy. The nomenclature itself is misleading. How can you have one party yet you have a democracy? And there are three, now we have deviated from the one-party rule of the PRI, the Partido Revolucionario Institucional, which ruled for a sizable period, almost till 2000, and then we started with the three-party domination. So we are digressing from the one-party rule of PRI, which ruled for 71 consecutive years, but lost to PAN in 2000. PAN is the Partido Acción Nacional, or the National Action Party. Now these three parties, one is the PRI, of course, it has remained to be important. The other is the PAN, and the third is the PRD, or the Party of the Democratic Revolution. Now what have we seen in the Mexican polity is very, very unique. And one of the things that I would like to point out is that there have been frequent clashes in history between the church and the state. So much so that the two important constitutions, one written in the 19th century and the other is the 1917 constitution, they clearly established separation of power. So the power of the church and the state had to be separate. 40s to 80s, we had the era of hegemonic party rule. And the downslide starts only in 2000 when the presidential candidate of PRI loses. So there are certain things which become very important in the Mexican setup. It has faced recurrent economic crisis, and that becomes the catalyst for revolution. The 1988 presidential election brought in a tide of anti-government protest. 1994, Salinas took advantage of Zapatista rebellion in the Chiapas, and he wanted to hold on to power, and this is how he's playing this card of Zapatista rebellion. 1996 was the first setback for PRI. 2000 election, Salinas is outrightly now blamed for the economic crisis, and before this nobody had the guts. And from 2000 onwards, then there is a clear-cut shift towards competitive, pluralistic political system. So if I was to summarize all this, there are one or two things become very important, and I would like to continue if there is an opportunity to speak about NAFTA, how NAFTA, the formation of North Atlantic Free Trade Association, North American Free Trade Association, how that brought in a concurrence of interests or a divergence of issues between Canada, Mexico, and United States. Now one thing is that all three are federal, but we saw how the nature of federalism differs in each one of them. Canada is parliamentary, but Mexico and US are presidential. Even if Mexico and US are presidential, still they are not alike. They are different in their form. The nature of party system is very, very different, but one thing is clear that except Mexico, which has now started the three-party system, it has mainly been one party or two parties or 2.5 parties, and even now we only have 3 parties. The constitution has been rigid in most of the cases. The amendments have been different in different countries, and the polity faces different problems. These are because of the international environment, the difference in the foreign policy objectives of each country, but nonetheless there are certain commonalities, and that is why it is best to study them together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That formed for a very interesting presentation, and we could see how the form of government or the constitution works within the US, Canada, and Mexico. And so we have a few minutes left, so I would like to ask you a few questions within that. Could you tell us a bit about how the US dominates the United Nations? How does that work?
Okay. So, the United Nations has the most important organ of United Nations is the Security Council. and within the Security Council there are 5 permanent members who have a double veto power. So how if there is a threat to international peace and security and the United Nations has to act, it has to be taken through the United Nations Security Council, because it is the mandate of Security Council to identify existence of threat to international peace and security. And once it is established, the onus for establishment lies on Security Council.
Right.
And once it is established, the action has to be taken. The action can be taken only if the permanent 5 members agree.
Right.
And United States is one of the permanent 5 members. There are at least 2 episodes where I would tell you that the United Nations has been tended to be bypassed. One was the Second Gulf War.
Right.
When they did not take an immediate go ahead and they attacked Iraq. And the second, we can say that this war on terror issue also, the United States has taken up on itself the power to fight terrorism in any part of the world.
Right, absolutely. It has been just taken upon by themselves, irrespective of the UN consenting to it. Right, ma'am. And just before we wrap up, a small question: how are the U.S.-Mexico relations as neighbors?
Okay. The relations have not been good because they share a border along the southern boundary of U.S. and northern boundary. In fact, in I don't remember the date exactly, but maybe I can tell you. Okay, yes, 1845, U.S. annexed Texas.
Right.
And that is why, we have a lot of mixed population. I mean, there are a lot of Mexicans in Texas, and because the environmental norms or industrial norms in Mexico are much more lenient than United States. So there is a kind of infiltration, or they will put their polluting industries on that border. Then within NAFTA, they have been collaborating. And Mexico is the 3rd largest trading partner of United States.
Right.
And Mexico has always looked upon United States. It has always said that it is the big brother, and US has contributed in the art of governance to Mexico. So it has been taking a lot of influences. It has been trying influences with Mexico.
Right, ma'am. And just a term that you had used during your lecture, just could you clarify? You used a term named kitchen cabinet. Could you just explain it a bit?
The cabinet system is a core of important ministers who hold very important portfolios. So that is a key to the parliamentary form of government. So if you have to distinguish between a parliamentary form of government and a presidential form of government, you will look at the nature of the cabinet. So if it is an effective cabinet, for example in India, we have a cabinet, and the cabinet size can vary from 20 to 50, and one member of the cabinet is also the prime minister. But he is a little more important than the rest of the cabinet, but the other members of the cabinet are equally important. So we give him a status which is called primus inter pares, first among the equals. So this cabinet, they will grill, they will take up issues, they will deliberate, and the prime minister often has to adhere to whatever their advice is.
Right.
And one of them has a vote of no confidence, then the entire government falls. Whereas in the kitchen cabinet, this is a group of advisors, like a kitchen helper. So they will help the president in formulating of policies. Whether the president listens to them or not, it is his prerogative. Many a times, somebody who has helped him in his elections are rewarded by putting them in the cabinet. So the cabinet members are not elected anywhere. And the moment you become part of the cabinet, you have to resign from your legislative seat.
Okay.
So in India, you become an MP and you remain a cabinet minister at the same time.
Okay.
Whereas in United States, the moment you become a cabinet member, although a kitchen cabinet, but then simultaneously you have to resign from your seat of the Senate or House of Representatives, whichever is your body.
Right. Thank you so much, ma'am. You've been very kind and patient with us, answering all the questions and also taking up the lecture. And of course, I would like to tell our friends that we would have more following by ma'am in her next lectures whenever that happens. And with this, let us thank ma'am for being here, sparing her valuable time. Thank you so much, ma'am. And thank you, viewers. Have a wonderful day ahead.